Ngā mihi kia tātou I tau mai nei ki runga I te kaupapa o te rā, ki te papa whenua o Waiatarau, te pā o te pane iri iri, te pā o te tō, tēnei te mihi ki te whenua e hora nei. Tēnei te mihi o Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei kia koutou katoa, I tēnei rā, I tau mai nei ki runga I te kaupapa, tino whakahirahira kia tātou katoa kia tau mai ngā whenua katoa o te motu. Nō reira, ngā ringa rau pā, ngā iho rei, I tau mai I tēnei rā, ngā mihi kia tātou katoa. Welcome everybody to today's hui, the Sustainable Business Council's annual meeting. It's my privilege to stand here on behalf of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei today and welcome you all. In my small mihi there, you would have heard me acknowledge Waiatarau, which is the original name of Victoria Park, which is behind us. Te pane iri iri, which is the headland, where am I? I'm pointing a certain way. The headland by the skate park at Victoria Park Market, and also Te Tō, which is just behind us at Halsey Street. So as you all know, or might not know, but where we are today is all reclaimed land. So my mihi is to acknowledge the land that was here before us and that also sustains us. I've got a few slides here that I thought would be really great to sort of weave us into our kaupapa today. You'll see up here I've got toitu te whenua, whatu ngaro te tangata. Anyone want to have a crack at what that might mean? Come on, there's some smart people in here today. That's right, yep. Care for the land, sustain the people. So I think that's a good kaupapa for us to get into today. I just thought it would be really the kaupapa today is looking back to look forward. So for us, toitu te whenua, whatu ngaro te tangata, look after the land, the people will thrive. So I thought a good place for us to start today would be this picture here of Ōkahu Bay. So over 100 years ago, a sewage pipe was put at the front of our pā. So if you look just here, that small whare that's facing towards us, that's Te Puro o Tāmaki. And this was the original pā of my people, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei. Over 100 years ago, the decisions were basically taken out of our hands on what happens with our whenua and also our moana. So what you see there is a sewage pipe running at the front of our bay. And I think what comes with that is the loss of language, resources, environmental sustainability, kai, and access to the bays. What's really important though is that this isn't a tragic story, it's actually a good one, that after 100 years, on Saturday, our people went and gathered down at Ōkahu Bay and we celebrated the last mooring in that bay. So I got my cousin to stand at the office today and take a photo of the bay to show you what it looks like now. So if you look down there, you'll see a couple of boats in the bay. My cousin said to say today that those were ours, but they're not. But I think when we think of looking back to look forward, we're learning from the past to make sure that the footprint that we leave behind for our future generations is positive and it's healthy and it's aspirational. So we've got no impediments in our moana. We have, I'm going to have to use dropped as a word because I can't think of a better word, but we dropped about 5,000 mussels in our bay to make sure that it filters all of the moana. And we're working really hard to make sure that we walk the walk and we talk the talk about our commitment to kaitiakitanga and the environment. And why do we do that? It's to look forward. So te apōpō means our future. And I think one of the kaupapa that I had when I was sort of prepping for this was 7 generations back, 7 generations forward. And I thought this is really interesting because I can actually trace my whakapapa back 22 generations, and I'm hoping that in 22 generations, my uri or my whānau can whakapapa back that far. And I think when you can think like that and really look back into your histories you can pave a very good path for your future. I just thought I'd leave those few little pictures with you. Intergenerational is what we're about, and intergenerational is what we're all about. And so I think on that note, I'm going to hand over to Alistair and Abbie to kick us off today. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.
E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā hoi whā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Anahera, from Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, for your welcome and care for the land, sustaining the people. Is that right? That's great. Thank you also to Ports of Auckland and Tony for sponsoring this venue today. We appreciate that, and Tony's going to join our panel later on this afternoon. Welcome to you all for our annual council meeting, and welcome to those people who are attending on live stream. I'm also pleased to welcome a couple of our emeritus chairs here today, Sir Stephen Tyndall at the back and Brett Tompkins also at the back. Glad to have you guys with us today as well. Let me just give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. This is the welcome and introduction. In a moment I'm going to look back, and then Abbie's going to look forward. Then we're into thinking big and acting bold. Then I'll come back and talk a little bit about the election results, and then we wrap up in some more hospitality. So let me kick off by looking back and looking forward firstly. Given my new dual role as the SBC chair and also the CEO of Toyota, these opening remarks will be something of a personal reflection on SBC's journey and Toyota's journey over the last couple of decades. Because 20 years ago, the New Zealand Business Council for Sustainable Development, or NZBCSD, was founded. And it subsequently morphed into this slightly more succinct Sustainable Business Council, or SBC. And when I reflect on those 20 years, it has been something of an heroic journey. So I'm going to frame it in just that way, the hero's journey. It's a structure that some of you will know about. It flows through much of our mythology, our stories, our movies, our religions, and I find it's quite a helpful way of constructing a narrative. And typically in the hero's journey, it's about the young villager who is called to go on a quest, perhaps to find hidden treasure, to perhaps conquer a dragon who is terrorizing the village, perhaps to rescue a damsel in distress. Although, of course, these days it's usually the other way around. Anyway, the journey always starts with a call to adventure. And for the fledgling NZBCSD, it really was a call to adventure. The organisation was formed when a few like-minded and concerned business leaders got together to get some action moving on sustainability. I just want to pay tribute to people like Sir Rob Fenwick, Michael Andrews, Sir Stephen Tyndall, and my predecessor at Toyota, Bob Field, who all led the way in this space 20 years ago. Obviously, they were concerned about the environment and climate change. It was already a well understood issue 2 decades back. If you remember, Al Gore was making his bid to be president of the United States, and he was on the verge of making his documentary An Inconvenient Truth to try and highlight this growing crisis of climate change. At the same time, another key stimulus to action was WWF, who were talking up how fast we were using up the planet's resources. Now, back in 1999, when we started, the big concern was that we were using up 1.3 planets a year. And unfortunately, it's only got worse since then. What you can see on the slide is what's called the Earth Overshoot Day. So that's the day that the planet uses up a year's worth of resources. So back in 1971, it was in balance. By 1999, when we launched the NZBCSD, we were kind of back to about late October. Unfortunately today, look where we are now. We're back in July 29th, I think is the actual date. And just in case we all feel comfortable, New Zealand is worse than the global average. So New Zealand's Overshoot Day is May the 6th. Gulp. So here in New Zealand, despite our clean green image that we like to promote, we're living on about 2.5 years worth of resources every year. Also in the late 1990s, Toyota had launched its first self-charging electric hybrid car, the Prius. We're about to introduce it to New Zealand. Stephen was one of the first purchasers. In fact, you might have been the first purchaser from memory. Thank you very much for your support. I hope you've all bought Priuses. But those early pioneers of sustainability were not just concerned about emissions and of greenhouse gases and the earth eating up resources faster than was sustainable. They were also thinking about really practical issues as well. Recycling and waste management, the freight logic in a free market. Our adventurers were convinced that we were inefficient with so many ports and with our freight logistics. There had to be a better way. Even the looming issue of social license to operate was concerning them back then. So there were lots and lots of calls to adventure in the late 1990s, and the fledgling organisation of NZBCSD stepped up to answer that call. The second part of the hero's journey is to find a path. Now, our hero needs to know which way to go. So did we. And a key direction sign in finding our path came from the connection with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They were in the early stages of developing Vision 2050, which was a milestone report that was focused on how 9 billion people might be able to live within planetary boundaries out in 2050. It's a project that SBC repeated in 2012, which some of you would have been involved with. There was also a considerable focus on making sustainability mainstream for New Zealand companies. We were exploring how we could mitigate risk, but we were also seeking out opportunities for cost reduction or new revenue streams, in recycling, for example. Another key ingredient was to think in terms of doing projects rather than becoming obsessed with lobbying governments with inevitably short-term agendas. Corporates, all of you guys, wanted to do stuff. We wanted to achieve results. People wanted to work together on projects, to collaborate. Another part of finding our path was reaching down into organisations and finding young people who wanted to go on the sustainability journey. In effect, investing in the next generation. So we gave future leaders projects to do, and we also gave them plenty of coaching and training to try and handle the resistant corporate cultures that many of you found yourselves in. As an aside here, perhaps the most significant sign of SBC's success over the past 2 decades has been the continuing rise of young people taking up the cause. For example, the recent school children's strike over climate change. I'd like to think that the SBC and its members have contributed to that momentum via a bunch of things. The Young Leaders Group and the work they've done, the success of many of the SBC projects and advocacy that we've been involved with, and most importantly, the attitudes of employees of SBC members who take the whole sustainability message home each night to their families. It augurs really well for the future when the sustainability messages that the SBC members started advocating across the boardroom table 20 years ago are now being echoed and championed in the nation's classrooms. It's fantastic. In Toyota's case, where we were at in terms of finding our path was trying to move beyond just building hybrid electric vehicles and explore all facets of sustainability. And for us, that meant trying to think our way through the whole supply chain right through to our network of retailers across New Zealand. Of course, for our hero, or on his or her journey, once they've found their path, the tradition is that it is a road of trials and obstacles. And that's what makes the journey worthwhile, and it's usually pretty character forming. And certainly the NZBCSD faced plenty of trials and obstacles along the way. ETS proved to be a massive trial. It caused real tensions within the membership, arguing about the technicalities, how much we should focus on government policy rather than continuing our core project work, and just wrestling with how effective we could make it in a New Zealand context. The stresses of that ETS debate eventually led to the fracturing of the old NZBCSD, and it merged into Business New Zealand, who at the same time were recognising that there was a need to offer sustainability in its offering. That's when our name changed to the Sustainable Business Council, or SBC. But out of that big disruption that happened in sort of around 2010 came some significant learnings. We came to realise that we were all on a journey and that fracturing the organisation wasn't especially helpful in the process. The proverb I quoted at a previous annual council meeting was, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that meant us developing a lot of tolerance for understanding where each of us are at on the journey and coming to understand that it's the direction of travel that is important, not just how good you are at a point of time. I have to say that's still an issue today when we face applications from some companies who have a less than stellar sustainability reputation. But it's about the journey. We also face the obstacle of being seen as a green-only organisation. We've had to learn that there is more to sustainability. It involves financial sustainability. It involves being able to sustain a community presence, being able to sustain our workplace, and so on. And frankly, we have also faced plenty of resistance to change, especially on the grounds that it will affect our economy. And this challenge continues today. Oftentimes it seems that a mentality of financial returns trump everything. That's kind of the de facto assumption. But we have had to learn that sustainability is often a long-term issue, and the resistance in economics are often very much more focused on the short term. And it takes time for people to get their heads around the fact that the economics of sustainability need to be put into an appropriate timescale so that we can kind of move forward in conversation. For Toyota, we faced huge pushback from our dealers about the cost of sustainability and the whole concept of becoming Enviromark certified. But eventually, every individual business in the Toyota family came to see it was worthwhile in terms of long-term viability, in terms of compliance, and even economics. Because when you start to invest in carbon reduction, it's amazing how much your cost base improves. So I'm proud to say that every Toyota business in New Zealand achieves the highest Enviromark certification, which is Diamond. Of course, the final stage of the hero's journey is reaping the benefit. Finally, our prince secures the treasure, and to really benefit actually has to pass it on or share it in some way. And if we think back to our call to adventure, it was to make sustainability mainstream, to move it from being fringe to being core to business strategy in New Zealand. And I think we're kind of reaching a tipping point in this country in terms of sustainability. It seems like the tide has turned. And the best example of that is the energy and momentum that now surrounds climate change. I mean, that momentum has helped secure bipartisan support for a Zero Carbon Act, even though there's plenty of political arguments going on about the technicalities and some of the policies. At least Parliament seems to be committed to putting this in place. Secondly, you've got the fact that when a few large companies decided to form a climate leaders coalition, they were joined by almost 100 other companies in just a year. They account for 60% of New Zealand's gross emissions. They employ 170,000 people, and they represent nearly 1/3 of private sector GDP. And they are all committed to act. And they're doing stuff to reduce their emissions. This is a monumental achievement. Corporate New Zealand is stepping up. And the third thing we need to think about in terms of having reached a tipping point is that we've seen stock markets and investors increasingly demand that companies report their emissions and their readiness for climate change. In our case, in Toyota's case, in the car business, electric vehicles are now becoming much more common. Toyota is still by far the biggest with our self-charging electric hybrid vehicles, but increasingly there's more and more niche players entering with pure electrics like Tesla and BMW and so on. Toyota and Hyundai are even starting to test hydrogen-powered vehicles in New Zealand. Sustainability has entered the mainstream. It is no longer kind of an extremist view sitting out on the side. The fact that SBC's membership is now approaching 120 is testimony to our progress. Thank you all for your support. We can rightly celebrate 20 years of achievement. But when you have vision, you are never satisfied. As we say in Toyota, there is no best, only better. So while we can celebrate 20 years of sustainability and progress on that, we're now at the point of planning the next phase. We're being called to a new adventure. And I think now is the time we've got to be even more ambitious. We've got a strong foundation to work on so we can kind of push on harder. We've got to set a fresh vision for SBC. So the balance of this afternoon's council meeting is largely devoted to how we might move forward, and no doubt it will pick up a variety of themes. You know, the action required to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees, that's a monumental challenge we've still got to tackle. Future of work in the world of AI and robotics, another big challenge. The very future of capitalism and corporate structures, how the power of communities can transform business. There's a heap of big challenges out there. So let me invite our Executive Director, Abbie Reynolds, to talk about how the next call to adventure might be translated into our path for the future. Thanks very much.
Te whare etu mai nei, tēnā koe. Te pape waho, tēnā koe. E nā mana, e nā iwi, e nā reo, ki te whānau hui hui nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm Abbie Reynolds, the Executive Director of the Sustainable Business Council, and I've got to agree with Alistair. It's been a pretty successful 20 years, and it has genuinely been a hero's journey. So congratulations. For many of you, you have now literally been working on this for decades, and that is something that we should be celebrating. There are real signs and symbols of our success, and Alistair's talked about some of them. And we'd really like to encourage you to add yours to the milestone map, just like to underline that opportunity for all of you, because we want to be able to talk about those moments that have mattered to you and the ones which are coming up. A couple of mine are that we now have at least 4 businesses with a sustainability role at exec level. I'm not sure that we even had 1 2 years ago, so that's quite a significant shift in terms of the seniority of the roles. And as someone who has been working in sustainability now for more than a decade, I reflect that I spent most of my first 10 years pushing at closed doors. I became very good at finding my way through them, getting a foot in, or if necessary, just going around. And what I'm experiencing now is that I'm constantly pushing at open doors. And I'm falling through them and landing on my bum because I don't really know what to do in that context. So I'm having to reset my own expectations about what it is to be in a world where sustainability is quickly becoming the new normal. This is our strategy backbone, and Alistair's already talked about the fact that the impact we wanted to have, our vision, is to mainstream sustainability in New Zealand business, which we've always interpreted for ourselves as largely corporate business. And he's right, it's time for us to ask ourselves the question whether we've met that. That vision statement's been in place since 2013, and it has been a hero's journey we've been on. When it was set, it was based on, diffusion of innovation theory or social diffusion, where innovators and early adopters pull through into the majority a big idea. And I can see Karen Fifield nodding, because you were involved, I think, in that first piece of work, weren't you, Karen? Now, for those of you who spend any time in the space, you'll know that there's famously a chasm at 18%. And if you can get across the chasm, then the system will start to tip. And Alistair's talked about that a little bit. We are now at the point as SBC where 20% of the Deloitte top 200 businesses are members of ours. And we know that in addition to that, there are at least another 5 or 10% who are actively embedding sustainability. So the evidence suggests that we are now at a point where the system will tip and ultimately completely normalise the approach. So I've got to say the job isn't done, but now is the right time for us to start looking forward and developing our thinking about the impact that we want to have. What is it that we want to do as an SBC together for New Zealand? part of that will be shaped by the realisation that while we have been successful, it hasn't been enough and it hasn't been soon enough. The stakes are now higher than they have ever been. And for many of us who work in sustainability, I can remember that the day the UN IPCC report on 1.5 degree versus 2 degrees came out was a moment of quite significant despair for a few of us. It was a real watershed moment. And we started to appreciate for the first time how low the odds are of humanity making the changes it needs to for us to stay living within a safe climate. This has been the first year where I've had to consistently have conversations, and many of them with sustainability practitioners, about climate grief and climate trauma. So for those of you who have sustainability people reporting to you, my ask to you is to check in with those people and make sure that they have the support around them that they need to keep going. As the scale of these challenges grow, they are all going to need more support to keep going, and they will be more important than ever. Our call to adventure also needs to reflect the fact that while we've worked on all of the right things, in so many cases we've been working on symptoms and not causes. Climate change, waste, biodiversity loss, they are symptoms of mindsets, economic models, business models and philosophies. And they're really difficult to identify and change because they are like the air we breathe or the water that we swim in. They're invisible to us. And I do feel hopeful. We're already starting to see early signs that there's an appetite to look at this. Nearly 2 years ago, when we did our material issues assessment with the SBC Advisory Board, they identified that how the system shares wealth fairly was something we were going to need to start thinking about. And this week, many of you will have picked up the news that the Business Roundtable in the US, supported by 181 CEOs, has come out saying that the end of shareholder primacy is in sight, that they agree that they have to give balanced weight to all stakeholders. So we've started this work with the SBC Advisory Board. In April, we had a strategy day out at Rapaki Marae down in Akaroa. It was hosted by our friends at Ngāi Tahu and Te Hapu o Ngāti Wheki. The day was ably facilitated by Marcus Akuhata Brown, who used a Te Ao Māori framework with us. There were 2 very critical points of learning from that session that we've brought into today's session. And we're really lucky that Anahera has already spoken to one of them. The first was to position ourselves by taking a 100-year view and to start to think about and articulate for ourselves how we want New Zealand to be different from our work in 100 years' time. And so for those of you who've done the Sustainable Leadership Program or you've come across the framework elsewhere, this idea of 7-generation thinking is something that we use. And some of you will also have heard Rangi Māori Hunia from Ngāti Whātua talk about mokopuna decisions, the idea that we make decisions for our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren, which is exactly what Anahera talked to us about. The second key point that came out of that day was to start to notice who wasn't in the room, which voices weren't there as we were starting our vision work. We've always been really focused on business talking to business in SBC. But what came up several times on Rapaki was that community wasn't in the room and that they needed to be. And community is a really big word, right? There's so much that we capture by that. But we've decided that we just need to start. So today we are inviting the outside in, and we're going to be hearing from community voices about what they're looking for, what matters, and how they're working. And the final and critical piece of framing is about how we start addressing causes and not just symptoms. Taking a 7-generation view gets you there pretty quickly. A 7-generation view also gets you to the realisation that we are going to have to start taking a regenerative approach, that we need to move beyond sustainability and just reducing harm to improving benefit for people and for place. Can we move our mindsets, our values, our activities and our business models as humans to produce net benefits for natural systems and for people? That, my friends, is our next call to adventure. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So now you have the chance to ask Alistair and I questions. So you're going to come and join me here, Alistair. So Alistair, if you think back over the period of time that you've been working in leading sustainability, is there something that you are particularly proud of, where you think about something that you've worked on with SBC or with Toyota, where you've really seen it have a significant impact, something that really mattered to you?
I guess we picked up on it already, both of us in our discussion, is mainstreaming. This was kind of niche 20 years ago, and I remember Bob Field, my predecessor, kind of pushing, and we'd make speeches to motoring journalists, which we do a lot of, and there would be deep cynicism about hybrids or that sort of stuff. And today, it's kind of become mainstream. I mean, they accept that, oh yeah, electric cars are really important. Hydrogen cars, it's interesting. And that's reflected across all of business. There's kind of this mentality that says, yeah, we should be aware of that. And it's reflected in the growth of our membership, the broadening of the debate across not just environmental issues, but all sorts of sustainability. It's really healthy.
Great. Did anyone think of a good question while I helpfully put that Patsy question to Alistair that we hadn't rehearsed? Yeah.
When you said that we are past the tipping point, which is fantastic, where do you strike the balance between supporting us and the businesses here to actually maintain that momentum versus staying ahead of the curve to reach regeneration?
That's a great question, Stefan. And I don't think we've answered that question yet as a board and a team. In general, our approach has been kind of incrementally to kind of keep staying near the front. So if we are using diffusion of innovation theory, then we need to keep understanding where the innovators and the early adopters are and making sure that we're bringing that through all of the time. So our tendency has been to keep going to the front and saying, what are we seeing and learning there, and bringing it back to everybody else. This will be a step change, and so thinking about how we do that is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think always part of the SBC's activities will be supporting what is going on in the kind of mainstream of New Zealand business. But Abbie's right, we've also got to be kind of on the edges of the frontier saying, what's going on? That's why the connection with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development is really good, because they are saying, this is happening in Switzerland, this is happening in Denmark, this is happening in the US. And it's kind of stuff we can bring in. Where your advisory board had a meeting before this, and we had lunch with Stephen Tyndall and Brett Tompkins, and we asked them to kind of challenge us a little bit about what they thought we should be doing. And I have to say, it was kind of, whoa, maybe we haven't reached the tipping point, because they really pushed the boat out in terms of saying, you need to think about this, you need to think about that. And it was really inspirational. So there's always a dual role of supporting what's going on in mainstream and kind of extending the frontiers.
Yeah. Kia ora, ko Alex toka ingoa. I just have a question, Abbie, for you. And you mentioned the redistribution of wealth. Can I just ask you both, how do you define wealth?
Thanks, Alex. That's a huge question. Look, I think to put it into its context, the conversation we were having was with the board at the time, and the underlying theme was a deep concern about the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots in New Zealand, and a question about the role that we might play in trying to start to bridge that was something of concern to the people who sat around the table. We didn't get into a deep conversation about what was wealth or not. It was the gap that was, I think, really, and we were having to work quite hard to find language we could use to describe the kind of sense of unease that people were bringing to the table that day.
I think there's a sense in which sustainability under our present economic model is not necessarily guaranteed, because it's set up for an obsession with growth. And you've got to keep growing your shareholders, the price for shareholders, and you've got to keep growing people's salaries, and you've got to keep growing this and keep growing that. And I think Brett summed it up with, what was it? All roads lead to consumption. Is that what he said over lunch? And the challenge is, if you've got all roads leading to consumption, that Earth overshoot chart that I had will move back to January 1 eventually, and will be stuffed before then. So we have to figure out ways that we can understand how we operate as an economy, as a business model, a society, to be sustainable over the long term. And that's what we were wrestling with on our board retreat to the marae. And I think that's part of what this afternoon's about, is to kind of get people's ideas. You're the members. Tell us some of the parameters that we should be focused on. Great question, thank you.
Sustainable business. Now, this is a business question. At the moment, we have a financial structure which is based around depreciation of assets, which can be 15, 20 years. How do we manage the quick or the almost instant depreciation of those assets if they're very polluting? In other words, it's actually looking at the whole financial structure. And is SBC going to actually take that, I think, thorny mantle on?
So I think the way we tackle those sorts of things is we start with insight from members, Jeff. So what is it that we're hearing and seeing from all of you that tells us that there's either a barrier or an opportunity in a space that you want to move into? If that kind of thing came up as something that we were being asked to look at, then we certainly would. It's not something we're hearing from members at the moment, so I haven't got an answer for you because it's just not something we've been asked to have a look at. Alistair might have a view from a more kind of macroeconomic point of view, though.
Yeah, it's a really important, as I understand your question, it's about sort of stranded assets, which goes back to the kind of the topic we were talking about in the previous question, of the whole system is kind of geared in one way and we're trying to shift the system. And managing systemic issues is a daunting challenge for just us as an organisation. But your point is well made, and as we talk through the afternoon, I mean, maybe we need to kind of put some focus on it. So as Abbie says, we're a member-driven organisation, and as members collectively think about these sorts of things, and it's about the long-term investments that we make and how you value those, it's challenging stuff. Yeah, good point, thank you.
So yeah, like you, Abbie, I've been in sustainability roles for a while and totally relate to the anxiety and stuff that comes sometimes when you're close to the actual science and the reality of sustainability, and then you go back into your business and you see that there's definitely a shift that I've seen, but it still feels, and it's something that hasn't necessarily been talked a lot about today, but supporting the culture change within a business so that people, the culture behind what the messages you're trying to give, it's really human values stuff. And a lot of the time you look at a business and what they're actually valuing and maybe the purpose and the things that sit behind it that don't align with a purpose around sustainability. And I'm just really interested in how SBC can support that cultural shift and really bring on board the people and culture teams and businesses to kind of actually create that space where people can have the insights for themselves. So it's not just one person pushing against doors, it's essentially everyone starting to question, everyone starting to think, how can we do things differently?
Yeah. So that's come up a fair bit actually from members. So I'm pretty sure we've actually got a kind of culture change internal comms piece coming up, because we know that communicating in particular climate change, but also sustainability and helping lead the cultural change is really important and difficult. So I think we've got a plan. I'm looking for Jay, who will nod to me if I've got that right. We've got something. Yes, she's giving me the thumbs up. We've definitely got something coming up on that front. So that's going to be a critical piece to it. I think the other thing as well is that one of the things the board asked us to do is to start reaching into other roles. So we've done a fair bit of kind of work, and if you were here earlier, you heard Rob talking about kind of connecting with directors. We're going to have a crack at CFOs, but heads of HR as well are kind of on our hit list, if you like, because part of the way we make this work is by meeting them where they are and saying, okay, you lead this big HR function. What are your drivers? And then how do we get alongside you and make what we are doing useful so you can be more successful? That's been our way of rolling, and so there is some work we've kind of got in the pipeline to start opening a conversation with people who lead HR, who often own culture. It won't specifically be around those things necessarily, but it's a way of opening the conversation up. Yeah.
I think just to add to that, I mean, it's always one step at a time. It's how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And I think We've tackled it through the next generation, of which you were kind of part of that future leaders group. Part of it is hitting it at the directors level and kind of making people cognizant of their responsibilities as directors, and we've been helped by kind of codes of practice and stock exchanges and investors and so on and so forth. It's tackling individual jobs within companies, but it's always one step at a time. You've got to kind of knock them over one at a time. But at the same time, I take great comfort from the fact that we're now getting pressure from companies to tell them what to do. If you talk to Kirk, you'll find he's under pressure from the constituent members of Business New Zealand who say, help, tell us, give us some ideas of how we kind of tackle these issues. So that when we say that we've reached a tipping point, sure, we haven't solved everything by any means, but the momentum has come a little bit now from people asking us rather than us trying to push it into them. And that's hugely encouraging.